good partners, foreign visiting professors, and we are sure it will be very interesting for all of you. Today, we're happy to welcome Dr. Luca Anceschi, a good colleague and friend of us. He's a senior lecturer in Central Asian Studies of the School of Social and Political Sciences of University of Glasgow. At the same time, Luca is project manager of the Erasmus Mundus International Master, Central and East European, Russian and Euro-Russian Studies, where our university is actively participating. Luca will deliver in total 4 lectures on post-Soviet Central Asia region. Each of the lessons will be different. And today, the first lecture is called Modern Regimes in Central Asia, the Problems of Emergence and Transformation. But before passing the floor to Luca, I would like to comment Professor Mikhail Richtik, the Director of Institute of International Relations and World History. Please, Mikhail Ivanovich.
Hello, everybody. This is a great pleasure to welcome all of you. And we are very glad to work together with Faculty of Social Science on this project. And I'm really encourage our students and all students who decided to join us today to ask questions, because such a great expert on the region and issues. And especially it's important that Central Asia as a region plays a crucial role in today's world politics. And thank you for being with us. And I wish us a great afternoon with an expert on Central Asia. Thank you. Let's start.
Okay, well, first of all, thanks a lot for coming. It would have been better if I was in Nizhny now, but this can happen. So the best thing to do is that we are in front of the computer and we interact. So as Irina was mentioning before, we're gonna have 4 lectures on Central Asia. And the way in which I am going to be doing this series of lecture is that I'm going to talk about 4 key issues that became important after the Soviet Union disintegrated. So the first conclusion that you can start drawing by this number of lecture is that this is going to be a month in which we talk about post-Soviet Central Asia. So, which has got a particular consequence. The first one is that we look at the 5 independent states, that is Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. I have been working on the region for 25 years now. I used to live in Kazakhstan, and I write mostly about Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. But the 4 lectures are all about the 5 countries. So in that sense, we're not going to be talking very much about the Soviet Union, but we will be talking about how specific policies, specific strategies, specific issues emerged during Soviet times are now reverberating, having an impact on the 5 states of Central Asia. And the way in which we're going to assess these issues is that we're going to be looking at 4 main areas of discussion. The first one is politics. So today we talk about transformation and the words that Irina used before. And talking about transformation, we try to see how these republics were when the Soviet Union was around and how they become now. What kind of state have they become? Whereas next Tuesday, I think, we're going to be discussing the economy. So The Soviet Union had a centrally planned economy with a Gosplan and all the kind of institutes that were doing what the center wanted to do. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, these states have to make the transition, so moving from one to the other. And we're going to see what kind of transition they're going to be having in terms of the economy. And we will talk about Central Asian globalization, we talk about migration, also issues in that kind of area. The third lecture, which is on an issue that is very important, particularly for the Russian Federation, energy. So we're going to see Kazakhstan being a very large oil, petroleum, and Turkmenistan being a large gas exporter. We're going to see how this transformation from Soviet to post-Soviet influenced the way in which these states have established, created, implemented the energy policy. And we'll always, particularly in lecture number 3, we will constantly talk about the relation between Central Asia and Russia in the energy field, because companies like Gazprom or Rosneft are very important in exporting the oil, the gas and the oil respectively from Central Asia. And the final lecture is going to be on Islam. We're going to, because one of the things that these 5 states has in common, beyond being post-Soviet states, is the fact that they were all mostly inhabited by Muslim population. And obviously, after 70 years of Soviet development, the kind of Islam that you find in Central Asia is not the same that you find in Cairo, in Dubai, or even in Tatarstan, or even in Indonesia. And we're going to explain why. Why are they different? Why they are like they are? And we will discuss issues like the influence that nomadic culture, the socialism had on feeling a Muslim and being a Muslim in Central Asia in the late 20th and 21st century. So this is the plan, but for a moment, please have a look at the map, which is here on the, let me just put the highlighter, here on the right-hand side, on the right-hand side of the slide. And so we have 5 states, all very big. Well, Kazakhstan is very big. Kazakhstan is the 9th largest state in the world, and it's got a very long border with both Russia and China. And it is the largest of the 5, but the biggest population is in Uzbekistan, that they have 35 million people in Uzbekistan, whereas Kazakhstan is in between 23 and 25. Uzbekistan is probably the most strategically important country of the 5 because it's the only republic that shares border with each of the 5. So we got Uzbek Turkmen, Uzbek Kazakh, Uzbek Kyrgyz, and Uzbek Tajik border, plus a short but very, very strategically important border with Afghanistan. So the way in which we're going to approach this region is that please always make sure that you have the map at least on your computer if you can, but if there are things which you don't understand, feel free to ask me questions. You can either use the chat. I can't see all of you because of the way in which the screen is divided and for the slide, but if you want to ask a question, you can either write in the chat or let Elisaveta know and I will work out, even during the lecture, that doesn't matter. So let me start with today's lecture. So today we discuss how the politics of Central Asia has been transformed during the post-Soviet era. And there are 2 main objectives here. The first one is try to understand what kind of influence the politics of non-democratic governance have had on the stability of Central Asia. So we're going to introduce this idea that there is a possibility for stability without regular turnover. By in doing so, we will always also discuss how the 5 different republics have established different paths to non-democratic governance. And to me, if you look at the picture, which is right now on the right-hand side of the slide, you see this is a picture taken in Turkmenistan. And the slogan, Halk Vatan Turkmenbashi, is the most famous slogan of the former president. Halk Vatan Turkmenbashi means the people, the homeland Turkmenbashi. And Turkmenbashi is the name, well, it's the title that the former president gave him himself, the father of all Turkmens. And it clearly shows to you that having the people, the homeland, and the president as the fundamental pillars of Turkmen government clearly tells you where the state is located in the state, and the presidents are located in the construction of an independent state. Very presidential, very centralized, but also establishing an important cult of the personality of the first leader. So the way in which we're going to profile the government of Central Asia is that we're going to see authoritarian consolidation as a multi-stage process, very easy. We're going to have 4 slides. Each of them will look at a particular element of this authoritarian development. And the rationale for this is that we're going to examine how this government rose, so the rise of non-democratic government, how the people have been targeted with some very interesting and very peculiar propaganda, how opposition has been contained, and how these regimes have dealt with the problem of succession. What happens when the president dies? Which is a very important question for all of post-Soviet Eurasia. What happens when the first leader goes? How do you organize the transfer of power? So this slide, this lecture really does one thing. It uses the ideas of regime evolution, regime transition, regime succession, as if they were the life of a human being, the birth, the maturity, and the decay and the old age. We're doing that. We're treating these regimes as living entities because we are sure that there have been, now it's 30 years. I mean, this year is 30 years since they become independent. You know, also for Russia, it got 30th anniversary of independence. And it's the same for Central Asia. With these states now independent for a long time, and this is no longer the 1990s when we don't know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen, and we're going to say it in a way that allows us to have comparative analysis of the 5 states. So let's move with the first slide. So I took the picture on the right-hand side when I went to observe the Uzbek elections in December 2019. And what is important about this election is that Uzbekistan ran this election, but the people that were allowed to be candidates were pre-selected by the state, which means that here you have institutions like the vote that have been completely controlled by the state. And the question that you may ask is that why having election at all if you only allowed to run those who are allowed to run? And here it's a very complex issue. This is not about who's better and who's worse, and not about passing judgment from west to the east. This is as it is. So we tackle this issue as intellectuals, tackle this issue as scholars of Central Asia, but also political science. And you have the emergence in Central Asia of what they have called, well, American political science have called competitive authoritarianism, which means that every 4 years, every 5 years, you have election and a certain amount of institutions or posts or jobs are distributed through our election. So if I had to say that the elections in Uzbekistan were illegal, were rigged, I am not going to say it because it's not true. When I went to observe the election, the mechanics, the actual voting procedure was perfect, was very well organized. I saw them, that's the institution, refusing people to cast multiple votes, so one person, one vote. I saw them avoiding any kind of tampering with mobile phones. So the mechanics of the election were actually safe, were actually fair. The problem with that was that beforehand, the competition was not enlarged to people who had views different from the regime. So this slide really wants to tell you that we have in Central Asia a process that in the 1990s, but also most recently in Kyrgyzstan, has institutionalized non-democratic governance, which means that in all of the states, in most of the states, you see in the 1990s the establishment of institutions, of procedure, of check and balances, of any kind of pseudo-democratic or democratic institutions. But the way in which these rules, these institutions were interpreted by the local leaders very quickly allowed the state to occupy these institutions, disempower, taking the power away from this recently established institution, which means that there is a particularly important connection between the kind of constitution that these states have implemented and the end point that is very personalistic rulership. The establishment in places like Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and in last couple of weeks, Kyrgyzstan, a very strong presidential system actually ended up resulting in the progressive, inexorable, so can be stopped, rise of consolidated non-democratic presidencies. And that's why you have in places like Uzbekistan, Karimov, the former president, the late president, ruling the country for 25 years, 30 years in Kazakhstan with Nazarbayev, and people like Niyazov, the first president of Turkmenistan, ruled until power. So it's certainly easier to manipulate a very strong presidential system rather in order to establish a non-democratic government. And then if you look at what's happening now in Kyrgyzstan, this is a perfect example of how this dynamic it's not lost relevance, it's still very important. So to me, have a look at what happened in Kyrgyzstan. You have an election in October, the people didn't like the vote, they stormed the parliament, they freed this Japarov out of the jail, they put him in charge as an interim president, they modified the constitution, and now when they vote again in a couple of months, he's going to be elected president with unprecedented power. So, which means that in 5 to 10 years' time, it would be very easy for him to consolidate its personalistic rulership. To me, that's very important because it shows that this is not just a process that happened at the beginning of the Soviet era. It's a process that also happened now, 20, 30 years later. So if we talk about the institutionalization of these elections, of this institution, this is the way in which they consolidated power, occupying the institution, disempower the institution, and making sure that the elite become a regime, which means that they don't really accept regular turnover at fixed deadline. What's also important is how we relate the consolidation of these regimes, of these 5 states in relation to how the population reacts to the rules that they impose. And here, maybe propaganda is too much of a strong word, but what I'm trying to say here is that we have seen, ever since the Soviet Union collapsed, that these states created a discourse of nation building, trying to build together a nation, try to identify the common elements between the different members of the nation in states that were never there before the Soviet Union existed. So that's very important. It is the Soviet Union that established states in Central Asia. in the 1920s, in the 1940s, in the 1930s, the Communist Party in Moscow, with the support of the Communist Party in Central Asia, organized regular rounds of administrative redistribution, establishing the border, what is today Kazakhstan, what was today Uzbekistan, what was today Tajikistan. And in that sense, these are very recent states. So Kazakhstan is a recent idea. It's not like Russia or like Scotland, for instance, that have been around for centuries. Kazakhstan didn't exist before the 1920s. So by having a fairly recent historic creation state, birth of a state, you don't have all those myths, all those legends, all those stories, all those events that you share with yourself in the past. So, which is very difficult if you have to, as a state perspective, have to create a discourse, a narrative of national building. What does it mean to be Kazakh? What does it mean to be Uzbek? It can't just be the way in which you look or the language that you speak. It also has to be a common set of rules, a common set of norms, but also a common set of symbols. And this slide really does that. It shows you a few symbols that are part of this propagandistic nation building discourse in the Central Asian republics. And if we move clockwise on the three pictures that are on the right hand side of your slide, you'll see on the top right a man on the horse. That man on the horse wearing a typical traditional Turkmen hat is Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, who's the president of Turkmenistan, has been the president of Turkmenistan since 2006. The importance about this picture is not very much about himself. It is the fact that he is riding the horse, which is a Halteke horse, very famous, very important breed of Turkmen horses. And by depicting himself as someone who is able to ride the horse, and it's also respectful of the tradition of the Turkmen people, the president wants to tell his citizens, well, I am one of yours. Look how easily I relate to your tradition and to the history of the Turkmens. Do like me, respect the tradition, but indirectly respect myself as well as the president. So you establish this idea that the president is the personification, embodies the tradition, the symbols of the state, and what we call the cult of the personality actually is a way to avoid the criticism of the leader in the state. Now, if we move back, I took this picture, and this picture, when I was in Kazakhstan, this picture is a plaque. So this is the bottom of a statue in very central Almaty. Almaty used to be the capital of Kazakhstan in the Soviet era, and now it's the most important city. And it's where our partners, Irina, are, the KeyMap partners that we have and in fact, the statue in question is 5 minutes walk from KeyMap. So you would see on the right hand side so this is a book, depicts a book. On the right hand side of the slide, sorry, on the picture, there is a handprint. And it's clearly more ruined than the rest of the plaque, because what it is, at the bottom of this independence monument in central Almaty, which has got a very high statue of the Golden Man, a classic traditional Kazakh symbol. There is a statue of the former president, Nazarbayev. And at the bottom of the statue, you also have the handprint of the president. So on that book, there is a handprint of the president, and which has become a symbol in the last 25 years. If you look at the Kazakhstani note, the tenge, there is a handprint of the president as well. It is one of the most powerful symbols of the Kazakhstani government. And I've seen people on the day of their own wedding going onto the plaque and putting the hands of the bride in the handprint of the president, because they believe that every wish will come through if you do that. So here what you have, obviously this is not true, like it is not something that we believe is true, but they do. And it becomes a common practice, a tradition, if you want. Everyday gesture, something which you do on your everyday or on your special day, or on the wedding day, or whatever other day you want. And it associates benefits, wishes come true, any kind of wealth, any kind of good with the president. So it brings the figure of the president at the center of a discourse of everyday life. And that's something very important, because it makes people think, not only I can't really criticize this person because he symbolizes what being Kazakh, being Turkmen means. I also have a benefit in supporting him because it brings me good luck, it brings me well wishes. So the third picture, sorry, I also took this one when I was in Tashkent last, and is a picture of, it's taken within the Amir Temur Museum in central Tashkent. Mustaqillik in Uzbek means independence. And the independence is one of the symbols that former President Karimov, late President Karimov, chose to describe what Uzbekistan is in the post-Soviet era. Uzbekistan is an independent state. The reason why he did that is because, and the reason why this mural is painted in the museum devoted to Amir Temur. Amir Temur is the most important Central Asia traditional leader, and is believed to be the first person from Central Asia who managed to create a kingdom ruling all over Central Asia. So in signifying the independence of Central Asia for Uzbekistan, Karimov is telling his citizens, I am the 20th century Amir Temur. I am the guarantor, the defender of the Uzbek independence. So in that sense, here we've seen the combination of the two nation building strategies mentioned in the prior two photos in just one symbol. Not only Karimov is the president that connects from the historical past of Uzbekistan, Karimov is also the president that gives contemporary benefits to the people of Uzbekistan if they follow him. And this is important because to me, it shows that the strategies, the propaganda narratives are very similar. And since these nations are disputed, as we said before, there is no historical Kazakhstan, no historical Uzbekistan, the creation of new rationale for propagandistic narrative actually create context in which new nation building narratives, new nationalistic, if you want, discourse have their leaders at the center. And that's very important because, as we see in the prior slide, the trend was to establish personalistic leadership, so government in which the president is the most important man. And if to the control of the policy, you also have this kind of more soft, more kind of instinctive and emotional attachment to the president, you then realize that the rule becomes more firm. Quickly, oh sorry, I moved the wrong one. Quickly on the next slide, and obviously we have, especially in places like Turkmenistan, we have a significant regime action to eliminate any kind of criticism. So this is not only in the wider society, but also in the between the people who support the government. So pretty much there is just one opinion, there is one views, one way of doing things, and there is no political space left, especially in more extreme cases like Turkmenistan, in debating what these, how the people relate to what the government say. And obviously this instigates dynamics of violence, of containment, of marginalization. And also in most cases, we have a lot of political prisoners who simply disappear. So I work with the European Union. There is a constant European Union campaign to try to find out, especially in Turkmenistan, where are these people? It's called Where Are They Now? So there is a list of political prisoners who disappeared, and the parliament and also NGOs in Brussels try to work out what it is. This is obviously very extreme in the case of Turkmenistan, and situation is relatively improving in Uzbekistan now. But I'm going to be really quick on this slide because I don't want you to think that it's all nice. There are also problems, and this is the area in which these problems are more visible. And if you want, I'd be happy to go onto this issue more in the question and answer later on. I want to spend the last few minutes, of this lecture, and I don't know where you go, on describing the succession. So through institutionalization, propaganda, and repression, these regimes have managed to stay in power for a long time. What is important about this fact is that, with the exception of Kyrgyzstan, places like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan, and also Tajikistan, have had leaders who have been in power for all more than 10 years. Niazov 15 years, Nazarbayev almost 30 years, Karimov 25 years, and so on and so forth, which means that there is such thing, at least a government durability. The government lasts. Kyrgyzstan is the exception, but we've seen this very common throughout the post-Soviet world in that sense. But there is one thing which it's important to note, is that sooner or later, these presidents, even if they say they are kind of almost godlike figures, they will die. You can't stop biology. So their rule can be permanent, can be eternal. It can only last until however long their life lasts, which means that the question of succession, which in the early 90s and 2000s were not very important in Central Asian politics, is becoming probably the most important question, the most vexing question that the Central Asian leaders have to address once their power is consolidated. And this slide, really, which is close to our lecture, and I'm going to have probably 10 more minutes on this, is the slide that presents you with a kind of a model to understand what this succession practice means in Central Asia. My last article, my most recent article, published on the journal Contemporary Asia, talks about succession. And one of the things which the journal editors, when I wrote the paper at the referee, wanted me to do is to try to suggest how this model can work for other countries. And I think that the conclusion which I'm going to present in this slide are for sure important, not only for Central Asia, but also, for instance, for places like Belarus, for instance, where we need to discuss, we need to think what options Lukashenko has got for succession if he stays in power until he dies. So, as I was saying before, we're going to discuss this issue of succession, and we're going visually. So again, I got three pictures here, and I'm going to move in the same direction and I move in the prior slide. And I'm going to describe with these three pictures how the rules has been established, and now the exception to the rules has been also created. So I was wrong. I'm going to move the other way, so counterclockwise, starting with the longer, the woman in the picture there. And who's she? She is Gulnara Karimova. Here is depicted in a pop culture alter ego, Gugusha. She was a pop singer, and she has been considered, not by me, but by other people, for a long time during the Karimov era as the most likely successor to her father, Islam Karimov. So this is the first pillar of this slide. How do we understand the issue of dynastic succession? Can the daughter of a president, can the son of a president become the next president, as that happened in Azerbaijan, for instance? And the case of Gugusha, of Gulnara Karimova, actually shows that it is not possible. And it does that because Islam Karimov died in August 2016, but his death was not announced until a couple of weeks later, because when Mirziyoyev, the current president, got appointed, he had to deal with the first family, which means that Gulnara Karimova got marginalized, got arrested, got stripped of all of her power, because she was one of the most hated figures in Uzbekistan. So the way in which Gulnara Karimova behaved, spoiled brat, not very interested in the people, very much behaving like a princess, entitlement, was not well seen in Central Asia, and made sure that the people of Central Asia would not welcome her election, which means that as soon as her father died, her political career went down the hill. And she's now in house arrest. We don't even know where she is. So if you move quickly on the right-hand side, underneath, you've seen here a man in a coffin. It's a bit macabre, but this is the picture of the funeral of Sapar Murat Niyazov, the first president of Turkmenistan. Niyazov is the first president of Central Asia to die in office. And the way in which his succession was orchestrated is that as soon as he died, a few people from the inner core of the Turkmen elite sat down in some secret room in Ashgabat, and they decided who's going to be the next one, which means that in a very personalistic continuum, so a very one-man rule before and now one-man later, we have a moment in which there is a little space for collective leadership. This is all done in a very Soviet way. So once the selection of the new leader is made, the new leader in both Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan was appointed the chairman of the funeral or the commission that organized the funeral of the prior leader. And if you look at Gorbachev, Chernenko, and Andropov, it's exactly the same thing that happened in the Soviet Union. So they go back to the Soviet consolidated practice to make sure that succession is done in that way. So in the case of Niyazov, this selectorate, we can only imagine who they are, appointed a very marginal cadre, Betin Muhamedov, who was a non-important minister of pharmaceutical industry, whereas in the case of Uzbekistan, they appointed the prime minister, so a central figure, a very powerful figure. So obviously, we're not going to go too much into this detail because we haven't got that much time, but I think that it's important that we recognize that Turkmenistan 2006, Uzbekistan 2016, they managed pretty much in the same way the death of the first president in office, orchestrating a transition that, unlike what political science had been saying for decades, turned out to be very effective, very stable. And now to the third picture, the picture on the top right-hand side of this trio of pictures. So this is the exception, because Nursultan Nazarbayev, the president of Kazakhstan, on 23rd of March 2019, relinquished, resigned voluntarily from the president, nominating the constitutionally elected president of the Senate, Tokayev, to be his successor. So here is not very much important who comes after Nazarbayev, but it's important that Nazarbayev withdraws himself from the presidency. Why? I think that if you think of the way in which these three pictures work, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, there is a very continuity between the three pictures, because Turkmenistan was the first to deal with transition. It did it in a way that was pretty much replicated in Uzbekistan 10 years later. And the exception of Uzbekistan difference were the fact that they elected a prime minister and not someone marginal, but also that they dealt with the first family, with Gulnara. Nazarbayev, on the other hand, established, before moving away from the presidency, a legislative environment that facilitated his way out, protecting his family. Nazarbayev got two daughters, Dariga and Dinara Nazarbayev. And these two daughters were very similar to Gulnara Karimova in Kazakhstan. They were considered to be princesses, spoiled, not very bright, so people don't really like them. And in resigning from the presidency, Nazarbayev left this legislative environment in which a particular law, the first president law is called, what it does, stops the president family from being stripped from the rich. You can't arrest the president, you can't arrest the daughters. So he protected his family from all of this, from the consequences, from the impact that unplanned transition could have had on Dinara and Garika Nazarbayev. So he protected them. But to do that, he had to leave the power. And now it's an important figure at the back of the president. So what is the main conclusion that we can draw from this slide? And then I'm going to close and open up for questions. The first conclusion is that in the evolution of Central Asian governance, which has been the key issue we discussed today, we have now entered a time in which, in particular context, and the next one is for sure, Tajikistan, whose president is the oldest and the longest in charge. The leaders, after having established, consolidated their power, have to now worry about the perpetuation of their power, either by going out in style like Nazarbayev did, by making sure that things are in order, or by ensuring regime change versus regime change. So making sure that the system of power continues by only changing the leader. So that's something very interesting, maintaining the monopoly in the political arena, but electing, appointing, choosing a different leader. So here we have this very important, and if you want, you can ask questions about it, distinction between leadership change versus leadership change, in which the way in which politics is done, the way in which politics is understood, politics is digested in Central Asia, doesn't really change. What it only changes is the person that is in charge of this regime. Thank you very much.
Dr. Anceschi, thank you very much for your presentation, for the information you shared with us. That was very interesting. We have just one question in the chat so far, if you can see it. So they ask about statistics of people who are satisfied or not satisfied with the political regime.
I want to unshare, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the question.
Oh, that's a question from Anastasia. Okay.
Yes, right.
Well, I think that, she's still here, Anastasia, I can't see her, but in any case, that's a very important question. How do you understand who support who? How do we understand how popular these people are? And here you have to have fairly precise, I think, answer. And I have to be honest with you. On the one hand, I would still think that these presidents are quite popular. So there is a genuine support for this president, especially if you go and ask people who are living in the countryside and not very politicized. If you go and ask university people, more educated people in the capital, well, that's very different, isn't it? You're going to get very different answers. And it's a realistic thinking that I can understand Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan just by going to Astana or to Tashkent. Same with Russia, you have to go around the country. So I would still say that in general terms, these presidents, and this is especially true for Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, are relatively popular. Although the difference here is that Mirziyoyev is much more well regarded than Tokayev because of the way in which Tokayev managed, Mirziyoyev managed to create this idea of change without really changing much. And if you want, we can talk about that. On the other hand, I am not really sure what kind of tools, methodological tools, we have to really appreciate the support. There is not a tradition in Central Asia of political polling. There is not a tradition of independent political polling. I mean, there is no such thing as a Central Asian Levada Center, for instance. We don't really have that kind of statistical support. And it's difficult for us to appreciate what kind of support they can have just by looking at the election for two reasons. One, because the Central Asian leaders understood the election results in the same way in which the Soviet leaders did. So if 95% of people goes to vote, that's for them is a demonstration of support. If 78% of the people vote for the president, that's how I understand as an indicator of support, even though there is no real alternative there. You know what I mean? So you create this uncompetitive system in which they present results as indicator of support, and it's not really what we can do. So how do we address this question as area studies scholars or political scientists? Well, I can go and ask question Kazakhstan, I can go and ask people, the elite, what do you think of the president? What do you think? But there is not the political environment in which I can actually run a very large independent survey asking what the people think. You can't do that. It won't be safe for me, and it won't be safe for the people who are living in Central Asia and work on this process. So to me, gathering the support that this president had, and I very much thank you, Anastasia, for the question. It's a very interesting question. Well, I simply don't know. I can imagine that they're popular in certain pockets. I can imagine that the Uzbek president is probably the most popular in Central Asia. But I am not, if I understood the answer correctly, I am not, there is no statistic that I can use to gather the report. So I think that I got another question, Elisabetta, here from...
Yes,
yes.
One more question about the constitution.
Yes.
Do they allow these regimes to rule for such a long period?
No, they don't. But I think that it's important that, so when you have, when the constitution says you can only be in power for 2, 3, whatever it is. So these are called in political science term limits. There are limitations to the time you can have in office. They can be, I mean, in the US, you have 2 terms. In the UK, for instance, there is no term limit. They can be in power for 50 years if they can go to win an election. Okay, so it's nothing to say. It just, in Italy, there is no term limit either. So the constitution of Central Asia have been constantly imposing term limits. You can only have 2 terms, you can only have 2 terms by 5 years, you can only have 2 terms by 7 years. But there has always been mechanisms either by changing the constitution or to referendum or to other kind of ways to making sure that the term limits were not respected. Obviously, it's a very important red flag. When you start to remove term limits, you open the door to permanent power, to very long-term power, which can be a bad thing, but a good thing, but also a bad thing. So the removal of term limits is something that has happened constantly in Central Asia. I think that it's very important, if I can make just a prediction, to see what Shavkat Mirziyoyev is doing in Uzbekistan, because I'm pretty sure there are term limits there too. And the elections are this year, and we will see what happened after this election and how long he can stay in power after that. Do we have one more question, Elisabetta?
Yes, that's not really a question, that's the comment. I can translate it for you because it's in Russian. This kind of advice for you for the future. Vladimir is saying that there is a documentary which is called Союз бывших, or like the, I don't know, the union of former, let's say, it discusses the life of the former Soviet republics after the 10 years of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and each episode is devoted to one of the former republics, and there is a good episode about Turkmenistan. As according to the last sentence, I think it's only in Russian, but maybe you can partly understand it or use a translator for this.
It's not very much for me. Thank you, Elizabeth. Also, thank you to Vladimir for the question. It's for my students.
Yes, I think
that what's important is that, so I teach Asian studies in Europe, in the UK. So if I were to teach area studies in Russia, Asian studies in Russia, it would have been easier because the student can actually visualize, are more familiar with what happened over there because of the shared Soviet identity. Whereas since Central Asia is never in the news, it's very difficult for my student to actually see what's going on or kind of understand how the place looks, how the region looks. So this kind of suggestion, and thank you very much, Vladimir, for that, is going to be very, very useful because they always ask more and more movies. And, and some of my students are doing a double degree Russian and Central European studies. So I would say, have a look at that, and we will see what we can do.
Okay.
Yes, you got a question for Mikhail.
You can unmute yourself.
Mikhail Ivановich wants to ask a question. I'm mistaken. He raised his hand.
Должно быть, что вы сами можете включить, я настройку
Михаил Иванович, микрофон у вас доступ, по-моему, можете нажимать. Вот сейчас, вот так.
Yes. Luca, thank you. My question related to Kazakhstan. What do you think moving capital from Almaty to Astana? What was the impact on stability of political regime? Is it kind of a universal tool for Central Asian republics, and maybe this is part of so-called success story of succession in Kazakhstan, kind of moving capital as a symbolic step to deal with local elite?
Thank you. This is I totally agree with you. I mean, I think that, so let me explain to the student what happened. In 1997, the capital of Kazakhstan was moved from Almaty, which is in the south of the country, to what used to be called Akmola, and then became Astana, and now it's Nur-Sultan, in the very north of the country. And the thing is that whereas Almaty is a very beautiful city, very picturesque, established city, in Astana there was nothing. So no one really understood why he would move the capital. And if you look at the government, they have different explanation. There are too many earthquakes in Almaty. We want to do to Russia. And so in reality, and I've asked this question and discussed these issues with the people in Kazakhstan, journalists especially, and they told me it's precisely the reason that Mikhail mentioned. The fact is that you had to rebalance the elite politics of the country, creating an artificial capital, which becomes like Washington, like Canberra in Australia, in which you have like a court, like this was a kingdom, which you have the king, the president, and all the people around him deciding what to do and how to do it. So if you talk with people in Kazakhstan, they will tell you, they will describe what is called the Astana bubble. There is this bubble in which everything gets decided there. Now, whether or not this is successful, I don't know. The city is certainly beautiful. It gives an idea of modernity. It gives an idea of making good use of the money that they give for the oil. But I think that it is a much more pragmatic strategic choice rather than one or general welfare. But I totally agree with you. It's because of rebalance the elite politics of Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much. We have one more question. It was sent to me in personal messages. Anyway, I can read it for you. How does international law see these regimes? Do they have any, does this law have any influence on them?
The way in which the Central Asian states relate to the international community is very important. And actually, thanks very much for the question, because here you have states that don't really care about the way in which they are perceived internationally, and that, for instance, Turkmenistan has been consistently marginalized, isolated from the state. And what I would say is that, I don't know, if you follow in Belarusian politics, they're now talking about instigating in Belarus the OSCE Moscow mechanism to have an independent investigation in what's happening in Belarus. Well, the last country where this mechanism was instigated was Turkmenistan in 2003. So Turkmenistan doesn't really care about how these international laws are perceived, are respected. It's becoming a bit more of a problem for places like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, where their regimes, where the presidents are much more conscious about how their image is perceived internationally. So in those cases, you have some kind of selective, calculated, targeted ways to interact with international values, international norms, and every kind of international standard for human rights, for freedom, and so on and so forth. And obviously, it's a very, very thin line to navigate. And it's like, those guys on the the equilibrium with the thing is complicated. But I think in general terms, you have different states complying in different ways. But at this given time, is less of a problem because there is also less pressure from the international community. It would have been much more difficult 20 years ago to do that, because back then, also Western states were more focused on this kind of human rights respect.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any more questions in the chat. Maybe someone has some comments, wants to say something, just let us know when we give you the right to speak. Or you have a question, you can also say it out loud. Maybe some advice, some interesting books, publications. So, anyone? So I think that was all. No one wants to speak. Everyone who wanted send the questions to the chat, and Dr. Anceschi successfully answered to them. So I think we can finish.
No?
Yeah, they're saying thank you in the chat.
Okay. Well, so I'll see you all next week.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone, for coming.
So some people are writing that they can.
Yes, I see.
Turn
So
on the mic.
Okay.
I know what happened. You gave me privileges. I thought it was you, Elizabeth. I can unmute. That's okay.
So try now.
Sir, I would just like to say thank you very much for interesting and such insightful topic for today, and thank you for Loboshevsky staff who assist the students today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your feedback.
Irina.
Yeah. So I think that yeah, we will see each other next week at the same time. And if you can already just give us the title of your next lesson.
Oh yes, of course. I made to you straight away now. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much once again, and see you next time. And I think that maybe if there are some questions, maybe yeah, no, we can collect the questions, so they can write you directly. How would you prefer?
Thank you so much, ma'am. До свидания.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.